So honored to have with me today one of the top minds in the wrestling business, one of pro wrestling's most seasoned cerebral agents of chaos. It's the one and only Raven. Raven, welcome to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Under the Ring. Is that you hang out with Kurt Hennig when he was when he hit Under the Ring and drank a case of beer?
Him or Hornswoggle, or so, there's lots of stuff under the ring. There's tables and chairs sometimes.
Yeah, there's probably an office down there.
Yeah, I think I'm probably in it because it kind of looks like it with the black blinds behind me and everything
Right.
else. And I did mention to somebody that I did drive from one ECW hotbed of Poughkeepsie, New York, to another one of Middletown, New York today to get here. So
Nice.
Let's start with what you're doing right now. You're back with MLW again, with the Calling, with Ricky Shane Page and Akira. What do you think of MLW? What do you think of what they're doing right now? And what's been your involvement so far?
I like it. I like it a lot. They have an ECW kind of vibe, which I always appreciate. They don't try to be ECW, which is what I hate when someone tries to be ECW that wasn't. But they do their own version of it, which I think is really cool. I think the talent's really talented. There's nothing worse than untalented talent. It really is the worst.
I know Court Bauer, who's run MLW, is always he grew
or uncreative creative.
That's also a problem.
Untalented talent and uncreative creative are the scourge of this business.
Exactly. I know Court grew up watching ECW, and it's a lot of inspiration of what he kind of likes to do too. So I'm sure that's good. I know he's mentioned that before. As part of this, you'll be back in the former ECW arena, the 2300. What does it mean to be back there for you when you go back there?
I love going back there. I've been back there a million times. And I like the fact that that's kind of their home base. Plus I love Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia. I lived there till I was like 10 or 12. I guess like 10. And I went to college in Delaware, so that's 45 minutes from Philly in the University of Delaware. And I always loved going back to Philly. So, I got a lot of friends there.
And what part of being a pro wrestler interested you when you chose to do this as a profession? And did that change over the course of your 35 years that you've been involved now?
No, I've always loved it for the soap opera. It's a soap opera, but instead of taking place at a general hospital, it's taking place in a wrestling ring. That's why I never went to Japan for any, I went like 6 times for 6 different companies. But I never tried to stay there or get a regular job there because it's not my style. I want to have a story where every week you have to tune in to see what the next evolution of the story is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, guys, I interrupt you for 1 second. It's really irritating when they cut to me on a 1 shot and then they cut back to the 2 shot and then they go to the 1 shot. It's really weird staring at my big mug on the whole screen.
Well, that's going to happen when we're conversing. I think it's going to go to the 2, and when we're not, it's going to go to the 1. So, so I'll never be by myself, but I'm by myself when I enter the room anyway. So I have to look at myself, unfortunately. So, but I think you're probably one of the best people to analyze what works and what doesn't work creatively in wrestling. Not only are you one of the last territory wrestlers, I was looking up. You worked Puerto Rico, Portland, Continental.
I never worked Puerto Rico. I only had a couple matches there, a couple of squash matches.
I saw you for the first time in Global, where Scott Anthony. You were in all the major companies twice, as far as I could tell. Once as Raven each place. What are some of the things that you see in wrestling that people hit?
I don't watch it anymore. I really don't watch it. I'll skim through MLW because I'm working for them, but I haven't watched it in like 20 years. I mean, like when the WWE did the alliance angle and used no one, it just showed me, it reminded me what a cruel mistress this business is. And I lost interest pretty quickly not in performing, but in viewing it. And so I don't watch it. Plus there's so much other stuff on TV to watch. Like I got tons of shows on, I got a list of pages of shows that I want to watch that I'm never going to get to,
To that point, though, what are some of the angles that you've seen, in the course of your time as a fan and as a wrestler that really hit? Because I feel like you're somebody who would really be good at judging a hit or a miss creatively, just because you've seen so much and you've done so much.
Well, my favorite miss was an angle they shot in ICW, not the main one, not the one in Maine, but the one in Savaldi's one.
Oh yeah.
And it was Lanny Poffo and Rip Rogers, and they had a T-shirt that says "I'm a brat" on it, and the loser of the match had to wear a shirt that said "I'm a brat," had to wear the shirt. And Lanny Poffo was arguing. He's like, Rip Rogers like, "You're a brat," and he's like, "I am not the brat. You are the brat." It was it was hilarious. But I mean, like in the 70s, I mean, you can only use so much language, you know what I mean? So,
right.
but still, just, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't as ridiculous as it is now, to me watching. Well, I saw it 20 years ago and it was ridiculous, but even then it was 20 years old.
To me, some of like the overly complicated stuff just kind of, I remember back, and I don't even remember if you were in TNA during this time period, but I remember there was a match where there were like 4 chests in each corner and a rugby ball with a message attached to it or something like that. I think it was Pat Kenny was doing it. They called it like the Irish Death Match or something like that. And the whole purpose of the match was opening the chest that had the green rugby ball in it. And it was just like, I don't understand. Like when you have to list rules on the screen that are like 15 minutes to read, probably not the best for.
Yeah, but I like storylines that are complicated though. I think the audience
storylines that are complicated or different.
Yeah, I think the audience is a lot smarter than we give them credit for, but they're also a lot stupider than we give them credit for. They're both. I think the smarter the fan is, the stupider they are, because they think they know the business and they don't. They don't understand about drawing money, but they know. It's like, why is it in wrestling? Is it that the critics? Okay, in the movie world, if you have a movie with all high spots, all car crashes and stuff, it's buried by the critics. But in wrestling, if it's all car crash spots, it's hurrayed by the critics. But yet, then you have a match where it's all dramatically built up and the story's been told, and people are selling their asses off, and that gets 2 stars because they didn't do enough stuff, they didn't do enough dives.
That's a really great point, and not
Thank you.
way that I've ever heard that stated before. That's I agree with that though too, because I tend to like a little bit more of the nuance when I can find it, either in an angle or in a match, depending on, a guy like Randy Orton for me. I don't know how much you've seen of his stuff the last, 10, 15 years.
I haven't watched in 20 years.
He's one of those really, small detail kind of guys in his facial expressions and his movements and in the moves he chooses in a match. So for me, he's always somebody like, all right, I want to make sure I watch him. But like other people are like, oh no, it's so boring when he puts that headlock on. I'm like, well, that's your problem. That's not my problem. So when were you most creatively satisfied in wrestling, and did it match when you also felt the best in the ring?
Yeah, Portland and ECW. Portland wrestling. I spent 2 years there in my formative years, and yeah, it was amazing. Because I used to ride every day with the Booker, the grappler, who headlined for Watts in the Superdome when he was like 19. So that shows you what a talent he was. And he wasn't a big guy, and Watts loves big guys. He was probably 240, but he was 5'9", 5'10". So, nowhere near what a Watts guy, and he had a mask. So imagine trying to convey, because trying to convey body language with a mask is, without your facials, it's twice the job. So learning from him, I got to pick his brain, riding with him every day. And, he wouldn't go out to teach me, but he would let me ask him the questions and teach myself, with his knowledge. And and he'd let me do a lot of stuff I wanted to do. And then ECW,
What about the ECW? I mean, it almost feels ridiculous to ask.
Paul let me, have a hand in what I did. He'd let me, when you're working on top, they usually let you have a hand in what your storylines are, and so I got to create stuff, and just got to use my creative juices. You know what I mean? And the show was so brilliantly done. It was, you know, still the best TV show ever made. You know.
Yeah, I remember discovering
wrestling. Unfortunately, wrestling should be a 90-minute show. Wrestling, an hour is not enough, but 2 hours is too much. But you know, nobody does TV in 90-minute blocks. But
yeah,
you know, and you could do it, but then people just aren't conditioned for it. But 2 hours is a bit much, especially weekly, and an hour just isn't quite enough to get everything in you need to get in. That's why Paul did stuff like the Pulp Fiction montage, you know, which I don't know why nobody's ever done since, you know, or made their own version of it, because the montage allows you to get 15, 20 interviews, you know, get 15, 20 people over in 5 minutes.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of close to that for the 90-minute part, Saturday night's main event was 90 minutes, but it was also booked in reverse kind of because the main event would always have to go on first because that was when everybody was tuned in at 11:30.
Right.
But they also did that little montage thing at the beginning of their shows too, if I remember. It was not obviously as, you know, as gritty or as kind of updated as maybe the Pulp Fiction stuff was in ECW, but what would I'm going to go back to ECW for a second if I can. Why do you think you and Paul Heyman worked so well together creatively?
Because we're both very creative. We're both very cognizant of pop culture. That's one of the biggest things. Like, I think I would have been a great booker back then. Now I'm not as good as I would have been because even though my wrestling knowledge is more, my pop culture knowledge, I haven't been able, you know, I'm 58 years old. I don't stay current, you know, anymore. And you have to stay current. And that was the problem. That's always been a problem with the wrestling business is bookers aren't current. They don't have any youth in the booking arena with them, or booking, not arena, but, you know, the booking committee, so to speak, who know what pop culture is, you know, and what's trendy and what isn't.
Yeah, I feel like you need the young voices. I feel like I was talking to somebody yesterday about this too. You might also probably, especially with as many women's wrestling angles that are going on right now, you probably need a female voice on the creative too. So you're not booking a whole bunch of women's angles through the brain of a man too. That might not be
right. Yeah,
the best.
that would help. The you know, you got to know what's in the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah,
you have to.
Why do you think that you and Tommy Dreamer worked so well as each other's nemesis?
Because he's willing to do anything creatively. He wants to die in the ring. You know, I mean, that would be the ultimate way for him to go. You know, like seriously, like if he ever got cancer, I'm sure he'd find a way to die in the ring instead of dying from cancer. You know. And I'm sure I'd be the one to murder him, you know. Although it'd be a mercy killing, I'd be Kevorkiying him. Not it wouldn't be murder per se. It'd be like manslaughter at best.
Right.
But no, we just hit it off. We just, you know, we were both at the right points in our career, and we just clicked. We just clicked as people. You know,
and I love how long the rivalry goes for. You
still
know,
going.
Even looking at your Impact Hall of Fame induction, he goes in for the hug, and you just, you know, not gonna do that. No way.
Worst DDT I ever gave because I just had my knees replaced, and so it was terrible DDT, and it was on the steel platform.
Oof.
But it wasn't the pain. There was no pain really, and it just. I couldn't. It was also like in jeans, I couldn't bend and move and drop, and but it didn't matter. The point was made.
You mentioned before, you know, maybe when you were younger, you know, being in the best position to be a booker. You know, you obviously have always had the mind for the business, and I
still make a great booker. I'm just saying. My knowledge, I would just have to find. I would want someone who also knew the pop culture medium. Better than me along for the ride.
It's hard to say without knowing what the talent would be, but what would a Raven booked promotion look like?
It would depend on who the talent are. You know, you have to play to your talent strengths and you hide their weaknesses. I mean, it's it's very it's a very simple business at heart, but it's very complex to get it right.
Yeah.
But it's really very simple.
You mentioned what kind of things in art, pop culture, literature, music, movies inspired you creatively as you were creating.
It all depends. I mean, it depends. Like what you know, like when I was watching the Yellow Submarine one night, and they had these villains, the Blue Meanies, and I was like, it's perfect for Brian. You know, make him into a blue meanie. You know, make him insane, and dye his hair blue and wear the whole look. It just all depends. I mean, anything can inspire you. Inspire anybody. You know, it depends on the moment.
One thing people might not always look at this when they look back at your career, but I liked your pursuit of the NWA title when you first came into TNA, chasing Jeff Jarrett in the early days of NWA TNA. I thought that rivalry really kind of put them on the map. And in that time period, you were sort of helping legitimize a lot of companies, including MLW and a little bit in Ring of Honor with your rivalry with CM Punk too. When you look back at that the time you had with Jarrett, what kind of stands out to you about that run in TNA?
I hated the drive to Nashville because it's like a 3.5 hour drive from Atlanta. No, so it's like too close to fly, but it's a pain in the ass to drive. Oh, I hated that drive every Wednesday, and the worst part was the drive back. You know, you're exhausted after after an all day filming, and then you're like, you had to get up at 7 a.m. to get there in time, and then you had So that's my least favorite memory from it. My favorite memory is that I got to go out of the business in a full-time on a regular TV show more like I wanted to. Yeah. Like, the last thing I did in WWE was garbage. I wasn't used right at all. And so the fact that I got to end my TV days, my national worldwide TV days, doing showing what I wanted to show and being what I wanted to be and doing what I wanted to do, as opposed to just being an enhancement guy, a glorified enhancement guy.
Yeah. I will say on your WWE stuff, I kind of was interested to seeing where the 7 Deadly Sins thing would have landed ultimately.
That's one of the greatest. That's the greatest storyline I ever wrote. It's amazing. But maybe someday I'll be booking somewhere and I'll do it and have somebody else do it.
Yeah. I also thought you were good on commentary in that time period too. For as many ways that they weren't using you, you always kind of find your way into some niche that you're good at. I feel like everywhere you are, when you look back, even 2 people today telling them I was interviewing you, they mentioned the name Johnny Polo right off the bat. I was like, you remember that part of his character, so vividly still 30.
You just have to be good. You have to want it. You have to be creative. And you have to understand the business. It's not all about you, even though it is all about you. So you have to. It's like when I did my angles in WCW, I always made sure that they were when I asked to do them, I always make sure they were with people on my level. I never, everybody wants to be, make me the world champions. First thing anybody would say to, if you have your choice of what you want to do, I'll make myself the world champion. Well, that's the last thing I'd make myself be. You know what I mean? I'd find somebody. I'd work at my own level, not my skill level, but my perceived position on the card level. So that way you can get approval for whatever you need. Like that's why I work with Canyon and stuff, because in Saturn and all those angles and DDP, because we were all at a certain level. And so it wasn't hard to get approval. You didn't have to say, well, we need to beat Nash, or we need to beat Hall, and and all those guys are already booked up in big angles, and so you just basically asking to be put in a higher level on the card than you are is always going to be a no. I mean, it's so rare that guys get lifted up off, from the middle to the top. It's more. It's more they're found by, like Goldberg. He was just found, and it just, like he didn't have to ask. They did him like that. You know what I mean? And why wouldn't they? Why should you should? But for most people, for a guy 6 foot, 240, 230, 235 at the time, probably, smaller guy, now I'm probably a larger guy, you know what I mean? But then I was a smaller guy. You know, it you and there was guys that were established as top guys, that it's so hard, once you're established as a top guy, it's very hard to get knocked off the pillar. And those guys don't want to come down a level, and they don't want to put you or bring you up to them, for the most part, because they want to protect their own spot. So,
right.
You got to make do in the sandbox you're in. And I was always good at that. I was like, fine, I'll get over in my own sandbox. I'll have my sandbox off to the side, if I'm not in an ECW where I am going to be the top guy.
And it's all still memorable too, because bouncing the stuff off of fans that I talked to, and I'm mentioning you, and immediately the win over DDP for the U.S. title comes up, and the match with Goldberg on Nitro comes up immediately, and it's like, well, you remembered everything that he did, so that's
you
probably
can always.
a sign.
I could have made Goldberg look bad, but that would have got me heat with the company. A, B, that doesn't do anybody any favors. C, it's not Goldberg's fault.
Right.
It's not his fault. He didn't. And how do you begrudge him? You can't begrudge him for having a spot. What you going to turn it down? Right. So no, I'm gonna make him look as good as I possibly can, and in the process, I'm gonna make myself get over. Because I know how to get over by defensively by selling.
Right. We're going to move on to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 relatively quick questions and your answers. So the first one. What's it like to write an issue of Spider-Man, and how did that come about?
I'm good friends with Brian. I'm friends with a lot of comic book people, or at least I used to be back when I was reading comics, but I stopped reading them about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Just got too expensive as a hobby, and it just got ridiculous. I got 30,000 comics in my basement.
Wow.
Well, no, the half of them are in my basement. The other half's in storage, just taking up space. But I'm good friends with Brian Azzarello, who's a comic book writer, and he was writing a wrestling issue of Spider-Man about the Spider-Man famously has a match early in his career, and so he wanted me to co-write it with him, And that's how Marvel asked me to. The only reason I didn't do more was because when I wrote it, WWE said I could write it as use. See, I own the trademark Raven, but when you work for a company like that, you lease them. You don't. I guess lease is the wrong word because you don't get paid. Yeah, well, you are getting paid, so I guess you lease them your trademark for the time that you're there, and then it reverts back to you when you leave. So while I was there, they said you can use the Raven name, And then when it was about to come out, they said, no, you can't. We won't, because we have a deal with Chaos Comics or something. And so we can't let you use Raven. I think that was just a screw job on me. But anyway, so Marvel's like, well, we don't want Scott Levy to write comics. We want Raven to write comics, So, and I could have gone back afterwards and wrote comics, but I just, it was a thing at the time. It was an interest at the time, but then I'm just too lazy to write them, to be honest.
I find it fascinating. So your thing was about the origin of Crusher Hogan. I was thinking about that. Is that Hulk Hogan, who was basically ended up becoming the biggest star of the industry, basically had 2 Marvel trademarks as his name.
Yeah,
he had Crusher Hogan and he had the Incredible Hulk, which that was a thing with WWE and Marvel for a long time too. Second, 3 count question: what was your favorite thing about working with Gorilla Monsoon?
He's just a genial. Generally nice guy, just very kind man, very sweet guy. You can't have enough platitudes about him. The guy's just a great guy, and he's funny and he's fun to be around,
Good for somebody young in the business to learn from too at that time.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I called him Uncle Gorilla. It's like he's like a big cuddly uncle who's actually a total badass,
Ithaca College Olympic finalist he was the Olympic trials, one pin away from making the I think it was the 1958 Olympics or something like that. So very good. And then the last question came courtesy of a pro wrestler who's a huge GCW fan by the name of Hale Collins. he wanted to know what you do differently with your DDT than other wrestlers.
When I do it right, when I'm not being lazy, I immediately kick my legs straight up. So there's a 90-degree angle from where my waist and my legs are. And I drop as suddenly as I can, and I kind of cheat that by kicking my legs out. But I'm already dropping as I'm kicking my legs out. Like I've already dropped as I'm kicking my legs out. And then the legs going from standing like this to straight to automatically. It's like when you pop and lock, you got to go. Hang on, how do I get that in there?
Yep.
You have to do one joint at a time, and so, but it's the snap of the joint. It's the way you bend the joint, not bend it, but the way it makes it appear bent. But it's the suddenness of it appearing bent that gives the illusion of popping and locking. And it's the same with DDT. When you kick your legs up, they go from standing to exactly 180 degrees differently. And the suddenness of it is what makes it look so good.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for answering that. Raven, thank you so much for joining me today on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. It's really an honor to have you, and you could be on MLW with the Battle Riot coming up in Philadelphia, and all the best to you and MLW and everything you're going to be doing.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.